It's Sunday, July 16, 2023. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is an expert on cults, undue influence, and brainwashing. He's the author of 4 books, including The Cult of Trump, and you may have heard him as the host of the Influence Continuum podcast right here on the Midas Media Network. And he has some new courses, which I want to talk to him about. It's Dr. Steven Hassan. Welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you, Anthony, and thanks for your good work, and congratulations on your award for your show. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, this show won a Telly Award for journalism and news, and so I'm grateful to you because you're one of my previous guests, and so really that's the award goes to my guests and my viewers. Just tell me, before we start talking about Trump and cults and all the stuff that you specialize in, tell me about these courses that you're doing, because this is a very kind of interesting opportunity, isn't it?
Sure. So people have been asking me, how do we deprogram millions of people who are in the cult of Trump and in so many other authoritarian cults? So I've been working for years to develop a course, initially for clinicians and mental health professionals to foundationally understand this is a dissociative disorder. People have phobias that have been installed in their minds and very specific things that need to be done to help them. And so I decided to put that on my website, and then I augmented it with a course for just the general public, concerned people, former members. And then in March, Anthony, I was invited to go to Utah by Dr. John Dehlin, who is a former sixth-generation Mormon and a psychologist who had been excommunicated for speaking out for gay rights. And so I went out there, did a few interviews with him, but we did a workshop together and videotaped the workshop. So we have a Recovery from Mormonism workshop, but frankly, I think anyone born or raised in a cult would get a lot out of listening, because the patterns and the problems are very similar.
It's so interesting. I have a friend from Utah, and I've heard all about his kind of Mormon family, and it is incredible, isn't it? And I do today want to talk about this line between religion, extremist religions, fundamentalism, and cults, because, you know, it's an area of your expertise, something I know very little about. Very keen to talk about that. I want to talk about, obviously, you know, what Trump has been up to now. He's trying to get his court case moved because obviously he wants to win the election first so that then he can pardon himself. So we'll take a look at that. And obviously Jack Smith's having none of that. I'm also interested, if we have time, in talking about climate change and how obviously we've had the hottest last couple of weeks, been the hottest couple of weeks in history, right? 125,000 years. And still, like, half the country deny that it's a real thing. And I was thinking, you know, that's got to be part of the cult. It's got to be a mental health disorder. It's got to be something that goes deeper than just, you know, not being able to kind of look at the data and be like, yeah, there might be a problem. And famously on Fox News this last couple of weeks, they're going, it's just the summer. And it really isn't. So we'll look at that. But first, let's use a couple of examples in looking at Christian nationalism, because that's Senator Josh Hawley, who's the one with the fist at January 6. He's fielding allegations of Christian nationalism this week after he tweeted a quote falsely attributed to a founding father, claiming the United States was founded on the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he later tweeted a thread of other quotes along similar lines. And many Americans who advocate for Christian nationalism actually have kind of little interest in religion. And it seems like it's just become a kind of rally cry. So what defines Christian nationalism? And is it a cult? And I should preface this by saying we're not criticizing Christianity or people who are moderate, you know, believers. This is an extremist form of the religion.
Right. So let me just start with the founders of our country were very explicit they understood the dangers of church and state being connected, and they deliberately went out of their way to want to create a wall between church and state. And what Christian nationalists, dominionists, New Apostolic Reformationists, they're all trying to create a false narrative about the history of the founding of the United States that has nothing to do with reality. And it's very interesting to me with all the Supreme Court justice abuse stories that these conservative justices are all saying we're foundationalists and traditionalists. We can't add anything to the Constitution, but they're ignoring this humongous lie about the founding principles of our republic. So the bottom line is that they try to say that God created America for the Christians, forgetting that indigenous people have been here for tens of thousands of years, and their property was stolen and their resources, and they were victimized by genocide and kidnapping and residential schools and smallpox on blankets, deliberate biological warfare against them. And so many treaties were signed that the government has not honored. So, but we'll put the indigenous people aside. Back to these people who are the Michael Flynns, the Josh Hawleys, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, etc. They're all involved with this political ideology that's aimed at destroying women's rights, gay rights, and using religious freedom as a cudgel to discriminate against anyone who doesn't believe or who's a minority believer. I'm a Jew, so I'm a minority. We're not legitimate by that ideology. And so it really is problematic in terms of anyone who cares about human rights or freedom or democratic democracy and science, frankly, as well.
It's the rewriting of history that makes a claim that you're only American if you're white, Christian, cisgender, voting Republican. It's very narrow, isn't it? And there's no room for nuance, and it actually goes against most of the values of Christianity. Love thy neighbor and the like.
Yeah, and wealthy people can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And as you do to the least in my kingdom, you do to me. That was Jesus's words. These are people who claim to be prophets or apostles, who claim to get direct revelation from God. Many of them speak in tongues and claim to cast out demons and do faith healings. And they have a phobia indoctrination against satanic demons that will invade you if you're not blindly obedient to the prophet or the apostle. And it's the leaders of these mega churches and smaller churches as well that have this ideology that are following their prophecy that Trump won the 2020 election. So even though Chris Krebs, appointed by Trump, said the election was fair and won by Biden, Attorney General Barr, just over 40 plus lawsuits that
62
failed.
Court cases. That's
right.
Yeah.
So, but the point is when you're in a mind control cult, you're not allowed to think independently or critically about your leadership because you accept it as the word of God. And I want to just say now, Anthony, you know me a bit. You know that I got interested in this because I was recruited into a front group of the Moon Cult back in 1974 and dropped out of college and became a fanatic and a right-wing fascist who believed democracy was satanic and that we needed a theocracy to rule the world and talked about infiltrating the government. My former cult was at January 6th, and my former cult has the Rod of Iron Ministries, an AR-15 gun cult, and a factory that makes them, and 2 compounds, one in Tennessee and one near Waco, Texas, training people for violent civil war as we speak. So I feel very personally involved in the effort to expose the dangers of this horrible, destructive mind control cult that owns the Washington Times. And by the way, I don't know if you caught the Washington Post article about Trump making $1 billion. And
that's right. It turned out some of it was from speaking engagements for the boonies, right?
$2 million for 2 talks. And it was after January 6th, I would add, and I would say Pence also spoke, Pompeo also spoke, and Esper, and they all got paid, but not as much as Trump. But I heard what Trump said, and he was endorsing Hak Jahan, the widow of Sun Myung Moon, who died in 2012, as the main cult leader, saying how wonderful she was and what great work she was doing. And this is a destructive authoritarian mind control cult that is absolutely opposed to everything we hold dear.
It's very difficult, isn't it, when you're talking about people's religious beliefs. You don't want to insult people. You don't want to push people so much and tell them that they're wrong. You know, I'm an atheist, I guess. I've never really thought about it, but I've never had any time for religion in my life, but I went to a Christian school as a kid and I learned the Bible, did Bible studies. So I've kind of had a very wide-ranging view of religion, but I've chosen not to follow a religion, and I choose not to bring my children up in any religion. They can choose to do whatever they want when they come of age, as long as it's not the Moonies. and yet we are faced now here in the US in a situation where religion has worked its way so deeply into politics, because these people that you mentioned, the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene, I mean, she is effectively the deputy speaker of the House of Representatives now. She's pretty much doing most of Trump's bidding. She's circumnavigating the speaker, Kevin McCarthy. She tried to bring about a vote on impeaching Joe Biden. The language that she uses is extremist at the very least. And when occasionally she lets slip stuff about how, men are the authority and, women should look after their men and all of this hierarchical kind of misogynistic stuff, I actually think there's probably quite a lot that she'd like to say that she's not saying so that she can remain mainstream and relevant in terms of her extremist views. But the point is, this is not a fringe group anymore. This is now at the center of the US government. How do you roll this back? I mean, will it ever be rolled back, apart from Joe Biden and the Democrats winning all 3 branches of government in 2024? I mean, because, this is in households now. We have Mums for Liberty who have managed to convince people that they're some kind of advocacy group looking after, young people in schools, and actually they're not. They're just a Christian fundamentalist group doing exactly the same as you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just very hard to kind of nail these people because they're using religion, which is a very it's a subject that we choose to respect when we converse. They're choosing religion as this kind of anchor point. And so you can't really criticize that.
Well, yes, you can, because if it's a political cult or a business cult using a religious front, you have to look at the behavior. And legitimate groups don't do deceptive recruitment. There needs to be informed consent. There needs to be respect for conscience. There needs to be an allowance that you can read whatever you want to read, talk to whoever you want to talk to, including ex-members, and the freedom to leave without fear or threats or intimidation. So I argue in my influence continuum that ethical groups, and they can be cultish in the sense that people are very fervent and they spend a lot of time and energy, but they're using their own minds. They're using their own volition. They haven't abandoned their conscience, and they're following principles and values and religious beliefs that are based on love and on truth, on humility, and on service to help those who are less able than we are. That's what the essence of a healthy religion is. And then on my influence continuum, the authoritarian cults, which include religious cults, but political cults, therapy cults, business cults, multi-level marketing cults, cults of personality. All of these are depending on lies, excessive deception, manipulation, control of behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions, the BITE model that I did my doctoral dissertation on, to create what's called a pseudo-identity that's dependent and obedient on the group. So as a Moonie, the real Steve Hassan was viewed by the Moonie Steve Hassan as satanic and selfish, but the Moonie identity cloned of some young moon was a fanatic to do whatever the Messiah, air quotes, told me to do, which would have included if he said, take an AR-15, go to New York Times and kill everybody you can. I would have done it, and I wouldn't have hesitated. I wouldn't have had the ability to go, wait a minute, murdering people, is this really a good thing? No, because I was taught to do thought stopping. I had a new cult identity. The good news, as a former fanatic, is I got out and I realized, Chinese communist brainwashing principles. We studied this in the 50s. Robert J. Lifton, Margaret Singer, Edgar Schein, Louis Jolyon West, they all talked about the techniques used to turn people in China against their own parents, against their own country, against their own values and their own best interest. So with that as the foundation, I've spent the last 47 years as a mental health professional, as a former member, as an educator, and as an activist trying to say, hey, this doesn't happen to weak, stupid people with mental problems. They want smart, intelligent, educated, affluent people with skills who can work long hours for no pay to do their bidding. And it
legitimizes them as well, doesn't it? To have people who are smart, educated, and eloquent, it legitimizes their offering because they've got good people. Let's talk about General Mike Flynn, or former General Mike Flynn, for a second, because he's doing this kind of tour of the U.S. where he's putting on these huge events, and it's all Christianity and Trump and let's take back our country. And he's the former national security advisor to Donald Trump. He twice lied to the FBI. He then got a pardon from Trump in the last week or so of Trump's presidency. Trump wants him back to take the same role again if he was to win in November 2024, which is worrying to say the least. Does Mike Flynn know that he is applying all of these techniques that you describe? Or is Mike Flynn a victim as well? He's been radicalized, so he just is preaching the gospel. What's the deal? Is there a level of consciousness with these people where he's like, right, I need to get as many of these people on side as I can? Or does he genuinely think that, this is the truth and he's just preaching the truth?
I don't know. I can tell you he's always been religious, Catholic. And I can tell you that for when he was involved with American intelligence, he was using what's known as fourth generation warfare on other countries to disrupt them, to overthrow leaders that the U.S. thought was not in our best interest. And fourth generation warfare is something your listeners should really look into. I've done a number of blogs. I wrote about it in The Cult of Trump. But it's a concept in military strategy that was written up in the 80s by a guy named William Lind, L-I-N-D. And he said that you need to create chaos, you need to create uncertainty in experts, in science, in institutions, In other words, disorient people so they'll be more easily persuaded to follow that authoritarian voice that gives certainty. I've got this, I know more than the generals, kind of thing. And I should say that he paired up with a Christian right strategist named Paul Weyrich in the 80s. And I'll add that William Lind, I'm told, met Donald Trump in the White House. So we have a direct link with Flynn, fourth generation warfare. What the public needs to understand is that we're not only under threat of the information warfare from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, but from within through people who want to overthrow our system of government and regulation, rule of law, and want to disrupt and distract our attention. And if I may come back to the beginning of your intro, I really believe the Saudis, the Putins, the Kochs, and the other oil, fossil fuel people have been embarking in a very well-funded campaign of mind control to distract and confuse and disorient and put out disinformation so they can't be stopped from continuing to kill our planet for their greed. And coming back to Michael Flynn, my guess is he wants to recruit as many people as he wants, but he believes that his cause is just. He thinks he's doing God's bidding. He thinks he's fighting Satan, which, by the way, includes the Jews and the Muslims and the gays and everyone who's an atheist. You're also, an enemy of God. So has someone been a puppet master to him and hypnotized him without his awareness? Possibly. But I'm a solutions guy. I don't want to just make people upset and fearful. I want to say there's a way to undo this. It will take a lot of very strategic, organized resource effort. But it comes down to psychoeducation, Anthony. It's pulling the curtain back to the Wizard of Oz and going, this isn't God, this isn't aliens from another dimension or emissaries of divine light. This is a very orchestrated information warfare now using social media, our data, and algorithms to mass scale persuade people to do things like who they're going to vote for or who they're not going to vote for, to polarize so that the other authoritarian forces in the world can do whatever they want to without thinking about it.
It's interesting how the foreign actors actually seem like the least of our problems compared to the homegrown terrorism that we're seeing from white Christian nationalists, Marjorie Taylor Greene, wanting to shut down the FBI, wanting to shut down school boards, as you described, basically wanting to end the kind of institutions, the pillars of democracy in the U.S.
I'll just connect the dots with Russia and the Christian right that goes back decades. And Putin uses the Russian Orthodox Church and has been bringing the right Christian folks over to indoctrinate them, has sent Maria Butina to infiltrate the NRA and say, we need guns, we need our Second Amendment. Do you think people have assault rifles in Russia, private citizens? They'd be arrested for having a bullet on their person. But they can then say to their people, look at those Americans. They let people with assault rifles go in and shoot their children. We protect you. Right?
We often
think about that. If you're listening to this, this is a very orchestrated thing to use our own constitution against ourselves, our own freedom, to convince people we need guns to kill, to protect ourselves. But who's really behind it? Aside from the gun manufacturers who are making a fortune, there are enemies.
And tragically, so many of the MAGA Republicans are currently siding with Putin in the war in Ukraine. We have to take a quick break for our sponsor, but we'll come straight back and talk more with Dr. Steven Hassan. Cold turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break your bad habits. We're not talking about some weird mind voodoo from your wacky neighbour or some sketchy message board. We're talking about our sponsor, Fume, and they look at the problem in a different way. Not everything in a bad habit is wrong, so instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Fume is an innovative, award-nominated device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural, delicious flavors. You get it. Instead of bad, Fume is good. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial that is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing and anxiety while breaking your habit. I gave a Fume to my sister, and she was shocked at how flavorful and fresh it tasted. It's easy to hold and perfectly balanced, and quite honestly, extremely fun to fidget with. The real wood material and sleek design definitely classes it up, and she feels pretty cool holding it. Stopping is something we all put off because it's hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com and use code WEEKEND to save 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. That's tryfum.com and use code WEEKEND to save an additional 10% off your order today. We've all heard the famous line, try it free for 30 days. Yeah, well, that's just enough time to try it, and then you completely forget about it. In fact, over 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about. You could be wasting money and not even realizing it. Rocket Money helps you find those forgotten subscriptions so you can stop paying for ones you don't use. Do you know how much your subscriptions really cost? Most Americans think they spend around $80 a month on subscriptions, but the actual total is closer to $200. If you don't know exactly how much you're spending every month, you need Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills, all in one place. Over 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about, and chances are you're one of them. Like that Stars app just to watch one show, or that free gaming trial you never actually used. Rocket Money will quickly and easily find your subscriptions for you, and for any you don't want to pay for anymore, just hit cancel, and Rocket Money will cancel it for you. It's that easy. Rocket Money also helps you manage all of your finances in one place and automatically categorizes your expenses so you can easily track your budget in real time and also get alerted if anything looks off. Over 3 million people have used Rocket Money, saving an average person up to $720 per year. Stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/weekend. That's rocketmoney.com/weekend. We're back here on the Weekend Show with Dr. Steven Hassan. Let's just talk about Russia for a moment, because there's this war that's playing out, which has been playing out for years in Ukraine. Of course, prior to the war that we see now, it was done on a more kind of subtle level. And if Donald Trump reckons he could have ended the war in 24 hours, why not? Why didn't he do it while he was president? The point is that we now have American lawmakers claiming they want the war to end, claiming it's because they want to end the bloodshed, but actually they're doing Vladimir Putin's bidding. They are saying Russian propaganda in the House of Representatives. They're saying it in TV interviews. They're proposing bills that Putin could have written himself. I mean, in the last few years, this sea change has happened. We couldn't have imagined this in just 5 years ago. And yet now it is prevalent, it is everywhere, and it's become normalized. We're not even shocked by it. That's what worries me. It's like the media doesn't even know how to report on it.
Yeah, the media has really been complicit in their ignorance.
Yeah.
And I'm still stunned that so many media people talk about the cult of Trump, but they won't have an expert on cults, the guy who wrote the book, on to actually educate people in a way that will actually help promote democracy.
Yeah. Well, it's the same way they won't have Bandy Leon, who knows about malignant narcissism.
She's an expert on dangerousness.
Right. And they won't have her on for similar reasons. And I think it's because the area of mental health is such a difficult kind of subject to harness in 25 seconds, which is all they'll ever give you on the news. Here we have the opportunity to talk in depth. But I also agree that there is some implicit bias that prevents people like you from being given the floor to talk about these connections between... look, Michael Flynn was on the phone to Russia all the time at the beginning of Trump's presidency.
Yep. So let's go back. The Soviet Union fell. We were happy. The wall came down in Germany. People like Putin was a low-ranking KGB official who was raised in it, trained in the KGB, and he felt like this was a personal assault and that he had a vendetta from that moment against America to get payback. So understand the mindset and understand there were many other people in the KGB. As soon as the Soviet Union fell, they left. They came to the U.S. and they wanted to have a real life. And in fact, I interviewed a man named Yuri Shvets, who was a source for Craig Unger's book, American Compromat, which is a book about Russian influence on Donald Trump decades before he ran for president. And when I talked to Yuri Shvets, I said, tell me about Putin. He said, I was much higher up in the KGB than him. He was a nobody, but he knew how to work the system. He knew how to use other KGB people to create a Russian mafia. Anyway, back to when the Soviet Union fell, Anthony, I was actually invited to Moscow by psychiatrists and psychologists because American cults were rushing in to the former Soviet Union. They wanted to know what's up with cults. So I was asked to teach a workshop for a week to psychiatrists and psychologists. So there I am with a translator explaining behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And they're like, Dr. Hassan, don't you understand? You're describing the whole system of pedagogy of the Soviet Union. And don't you understand, Dr. Hassan, we would put these dissidents into psychiatric facilities because they were criticizing the regime. And then they said, oh, now we understand. You are counseling us. And I was like, if the shoe fits. Yeah. Like, this is the model based on Chinese communists, but that was based on Russian communism, right? So what I found there was people, really wonderful people who had been raised in an authoritarian political cult, the Soviet Union. And I'll give you one more quick story. I was asked, would you like to speak to some high school guidance counselors from Siberia who had never met a Westerner? And I was like, definitely, please. I'm in a room with hundreds of folks. And before I start speaking, I said, is it true that you've never met a Westerner? Oh, yeah. And I said, you must have a million questions. So rather than me speak, ask me anything. And I'm not kidding, Anthony, they were like, yeah. And then finally someone went, you lecture, we take notes.
They're just used to the authoritarian system.
That's their normal.
That's their normal, right?
We in America are so spoiled. We don't get what it's like to be raised in an authoritarian cult or a society.
But is that a reason why Donald Trump's authoritarianism is actually of interest to so many people? Because enables them to, maybe sit back and be a little more lazy and to be less engaged, because it's like, well, that guy knows what he's talking about. He's rich. They don't have those historical reference points, and they don't recognize that actually what they're dealing with is being the subject of a dictator or an authoritarian regime.
I think that the essence isn't blaming people that they were taken in by his lies and his malignant narcissistic charm, because you don't know that you are susceptible to a cult leader until you're under the spell, as I was, until I got out and went, holy mackerel, what happened to me? And my mind had been hacked. And I would say that social media, the hacking of Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and the algorithms and Peter Thiel and et cetera, were a big factor in Trump being elected, frankly. But I think people were so programmed to hate Hillary, believing a lot of lies about Hillary, and the Democrats were killing babies and eating them, etc.
And the timing, obviously, of James Comey.
So they weren't voting for Trump; they were voting Republican, but they didn't want another Clinton in the White House. So he squeaked in by very few votes. Yeah. But the important thing that I want to say to everybody is that mind control is not permanent, but the thing that is the biggest problem, Anthony, is we're addicted to our cell phones and our platforms, and people are spending 8-10 hours a day. And people need to understand we're getting AI filtered messaging because of our likes and our dislikes, etc.
The algorithm knows us better than we do.
And so people need, if you want someone to reality test any mind control situation, even if they don't believe they were in a cult, as I didn't, turn off the cell phones, don't log on, don't do the practices of the group for a week, like sleep, eat, dance, be in nature, play with your dog, play with your kids. Remember who you are and what are your values, and then learn about Chinese communist brainwashing, learn the BITE model of authoritarian control and the influence continuum. And here's the thing. Deliberately seek out critics and former members, right? Because if you're in a mind control cult, you're programmed, don't believe anything that's negative. Don't listen to any former true believer. By default. So everything's fake news except us. Well, take the position I'm a smart person. I want to know whether I've been brainwashed or not. Let me learn the models. Let me talk to the most intelligent, educated critics there is. And I might add, reading The Cult of Trump has helped a MAGA person, a Pam Hemphill, who was serving, she served 2 months for the January 6th. Who's read my book now and is like, this book helped me understand how I had been brainwashed by Trump. And then once you have the model, the former members, then reflect back. Like, what was your earliest memory of Trump, if we're talking about the cult of Trump? What was your first impression? Was it on The Apprentice? Or was it him cheating on his wife or a girlfriend in a tabloid? Like, remember that. And then slow move. How did you start taking him seriously? And when did you start accepting everything he said without question? And with those details, people are smart enough to go, wait a minute. My wake-up moment, Anthony, after 5 days of deprogramming was the ex-members handed me one of Moon's own speeches to congressmen and senators. They didn't say, look what a liar he is. No, they said, just read this and tell us what you think. And I'm reading this, and Moon is saying how he's surprised that Americans could think that a Korean could brainwash Americans because he likes Americans so much, and Americans are so smart. And I had met with him 100 times in person where he said the opposite. And it was the first time in 2.5 years I said, what a liar. And as soon as I allowed that thought into my mind consciously, I went, if he's a liar, then he can't be the Messiah. He's not a trustworthy person. How could all of the things that I've been doing actually bring about the ideal kingdom of heaven on earth? And I cried for 3 hours because I had realized I had been taken.
Isn't this a technique that Trump employs at rallies, for example? He'll say things that are pertinent to that crowd. He'll say whatever to whichever crowd he's playing to. And what I don't understand is how there are plenty of MAGA supporters that follow him around the country, and they show up at different rallies, and they must see how he is tweaking the same script to be, more pertinent to those he's in front of. In the same way as when he took all that money to go and do a Mooney's speech, he probably, didn't know much of what he was talking about. He just read the prompt and did it with a lot of confidence.
But I as a leader, I would accompany Moon to different venues within the group, and I heard him, "You're the most special part of our organization. God is counting on you." And then the same rap to another part of the organization. But honestly, I couldn't critically evaluate that. I couldn't get to a point of going, wait a minute, he's just manipulating people to get more devotion and have them work
because
harder.
It's very performative, isn't it? And actually, this is a word that I've started to use a lot to describe much of what the Republicans are doing. If we take, for example, this investigation that they're doing with this kind of fake whistleblower, and they're trying to investigate the Bidens and the FBI, and they had Christopher Wray, the FBI boss, on the stand, and he was basically saying, "What are you talking about?" It's so performative. It is just about, I don't know whether it's clickbait or looking like they're doing something or just trying to undermine institutions or maybe all of the above. But it's got to a point now where these MAGA Republicans, Jim Jordan, James Comer, these people who are often on these judiciary committees and on security committees, they are trying to convince the voting public, knowing that these moments are televised, to distrust the FBI, to distrust the Justice Department. And ultimately, all of this leads to getting Trump reelected and to maintain the big lie that the election was rigged. I mean,
it's very deliberate. And these people are traitors. They don't want American democracy. And anyone who supports Putin over the people of Ukraine haven't studied history, don't understand what actually is happening. And a lot of the problem, Anthony, is that a lot of the regulations that were put in place to keep power in check have been dismantled systematically over decades. Groups like the Council for National Policy that inserted the founding editor of the Washington Times, the Mooney newspaper, this secret organization, conservative organization to fight the gays and the liberals and the secularists, etc. They're believing that they're doing good. But in the meantime, it's also about power, money, and sex, I might add. But I'd say a lot of what's happened with Christopher Wray was to keep their followers programmed. Not about converting new people to believe it, but mostly about keeping people programmed. And I want to come back, Anthony, since you do have me on more than 3 minutes. We can undo this, but it starts with learning and understanding how to tell the difference between ethical influence and unethical influence. Ethical religious institutions with accountable leadership, transparency around funds, checks and balances, freedom to question, freedom to leave without threats or fear, versus what is now being practiced by so many different authoritarian cults. And we taxpayers are subsidizing these authoritarian cults to destroy our country and destroy our own rights. Huh?
That's the irony of it. I mean, It's almost a civil war, though, isn't it? Like a Cold War. It
is a civil war psychologically. It's also information warfare with other countries. But unfortunately, they want to push for violence in the street. That's what Hitler did. That's what all the dictators ultimately do. They identify the intellectuals and the naysayers and the artists, and they either kick them out of the country, or they collect them, or they kill them, so that the rest, just out of fear and survival instinct, shut up and go along for the ride.
Trump has talked about this in very clear language. He's talking about having freedom cities. He's talking about only employing civil servants who have the same political ideology as him, and making them, take tests to find out if they're patriots or not. I mean, this is the language of fascism.
Exactly.
And no one is calling it out in the media. I mean, he's saying these things on tape. These videos are going out on his campaign website. The media is just carrying on as if it's just another day.
Yeah, it's absurd. And I blame the corporate owners of the corporate media, who are either complicit, or they're just thinking, I want ratings, and let's keep it, incendiary and polarized. But it's a strategy that's doomed to fail, because we need to do something akin to what's happening in Israel now. By the way, Netanyahu is in the cult of Trump. Sheldon Adelson cut a deal that they would move the capital to Jerusalem and advance the settlers, all of the horrible stuff with the Palestinians. And now they want to change the judiciary in Israel, but a lot of people are protesting very aggressively to stop it. But Netanyahu's in trouble because he, has legal problems himself, and he needs the radical right to keep himself out of jail. And so, unfortunately, and the other thing that I want to just say is that there's an estimated 1 million Jews who emigrated from Russia to Israel, and they listen to RT TV and Russian propaganda.
Yeah.
And the oligarchs of Russia all have Israeli passports, I'm told. And so American Jews need to understand, yes, we want to protect Israel, but what's being done here is creating such a anti-Semitic environment around the world, because people see the violence and the settlers, and people like Netanyahu and the extremists are like, well, we'll keep you safe if you're Jewish. But by the way, they don't think I'm a Jew because I'm not Orthodox. I'm not wearing a kippah, and I drive to my temple on Shabbat. So I'm not, and my rabbi's a woman who's conservatively trained. That's not Jewish by their criteria. And I'm like, get these extremists out of power in Israel, please. And let's get back to human rights.
People don't understand how Russia is such a mighty country in terms of its intelligence, but also the long game that it plays. And I was watching a documentary about Yeltsin and Gorbachev, and in the background there, small head at the back, a young Vladimir Putin, putting himself, keeping his mouth shut, putting himself right there. I mean, he should never have succeeded Boris Yeltsin, right? He was the wrong man for the job, but he manipulated that. He faked a friendship and connection with Yeltsin. And the long game, because people say that Russia identified Trump years ago as a potential mark to, make him even have the idea of running for president. Of course, he thought about running a few times, didn't he?
Yep.
And they certainly had a hand in him winning. As we know, he didn't win the popular vote. And in 2020, you described Cambridge Analytica and many of this kind of information warfare, but a lot of those servers were discovered connected to the Kremlin.
Definitely.
And so this long game is something that I think we here in the US need to be a bit more thoughtful about, because, we're a kind of popcorn generation, right? It's like, make it quick, eat it, go to sleep. The Russians don't operate like that. They have a plan, a game plan, a bigger picture, and they stick to it.
So I'll just say Americans need to study history a bit more and understand that we're the superpower that has kept the world away from another war, the Great War since World War II. And so every other country wants to take us down. And we're like, we're America, we're special and we're exceptional. And
Team America,
as
World
if
Police.
it's going to we're going to rest on our laurels and everyone else is going to stay static. And it just doesn't work that way in the world. And we're in an environment now where we really have to realign what are our core values. And I say love is much more than fear. If you love your kids, there can be a coyote coming after your kid. You're going to go after the coyote. You're not going to go, I'm going to take the kid. No. And we have to have that level of like, this is our country, and we don't want to be like Vladimir Putin's cult or Xi's cult. And we have to start acting like this is an emergency, because it is.
Vladimir Putin obviously is dead against the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. The Republicans' answer to this is to remove the US from the NATO alliance. Marjorie Taylor Greene proposed an amendment the other day saying that the US needs to leave NATO. It was like she was parroting Putin propaganda.
She wasn't like she was parroting.
She was.
She was parroting. And people need to remember she was QAnon.
Yeah.
Before she became a congresswoman, she was spouting pure mind control QAnon cult.
And she still is, to all intents and purposes. She's probably just saying it less to become, to be accepted a little more. But the point is that it's not America that's keeping the world safe, really. It's this alliance of NATO countries that's keeping the world safe, you could argue. I mean, America, certainly under Trump, the idea of withdrawing from all theaters of war, even as a peacekeeping force, the US is not involved in any conflicts at the moment. Afghanistan, Iraq, all kind of, we lost those wars. The Taliban took over in Afghanistan under Donald Trump's decision to pull the troops out. There was a report about that recently that actually blamed Trump and Biden for that withdrawal and what followed. But removing the US from NATO is the step that they would like to take, which will destabilize the whole world.
That's what Putin wants.
Yeah. Then you'll have the World War III. Yeah.
Every time you hear an American politician saying, get out of NATO or let's end the war in Ukraine, it's Putin.
Yeah.
Putin.
Yeah.
It's Putin.
I remember Marjorie Taylor Greene, when she was talking about this states becoming wholly Republican and wholly Democrat, and she was trying to create some kind of segregated states. And I was thinking, like, she's not smart enough to come up with this type of stuff. Like, she's obviously been told to say this.
1,000%.
She is a mouthpiece. She's infiltrated Congress. She ran a gym. Like, there's absolutely no reason why she shouldn't still be in that gym, but she's in Congress saying stuff that is so anti-American, and in the next breath claims to be a patriot. She is a puppet. She is a mouthpiece. She's using her platform, but others are in control.
Right. So the question is, you know it, I know it, probably a bunch of people listening to your platform know it. Certainly the MeidasTouch folks know it. But are we just going to be communicating to the people who get it? Or are we going to start being strategic and really thinking about how are they doing what they're doing and what can we do ethically to undercut their power and control over people's minds? And for me, one of the answers, and we're seeing this in large form, is former members of Scientology, NXIVM, Bill Gothard, the Moonies, are telling their stories.
Yes.
And a lot of these folks are brilliant, accomplished, professors, and they're outing their story in order to normalize, right? Because when you're in a mind control, when you're not in one, you think only weak, stupid people could ever get into that. It's so obviously a bad thing. But when people come out and they're like, no, I believe that, oh yeah, I mindlessly did X, Y, and Z. I threw out my 400 original poems, even though I was a creative writing major in college, because God wanted me to, or so I believe.
I'm sorry.
So it's these former members getting more amplification, reaching out to people and saying, look, if you have someone who's in the cult of Trump or in the MAGA train, especially in the battleground states, start reconnecting with them and stop calling them names and stop saying you're in a cult and you're brainwashed, because that activates the cult identity, makes them defensive, and makes them feel persecuted. The opposite of what you want. What
you talk about other cults? Can you talk about, watch that documentary about Nexium, for example?
You say, I just watched this. I'd love for you to watch it. I'd love to get your opinion, and let's talk about it.
And that might trigger something in their own minds about their own situation.
It definitely plants seeds. The two biggest areas where you can have robust, real conversations is about Chinese communist brainwashing, because we know they're operating programs with at least 1 million to 2 million people right now, aside from the general society, and pimps and traffickers, and how they recruit and groom and indoctrinate people to be sex slaves or labor trafficking slaves. MAGA people will listen to those discussions, and you can talk about the influence continuum and bite model and get into the details of it. And what I want to say is, start by reconnecting with people that you know and care about. And even if you haven't talked to them in 4 years, just say, I miss you. You're my uncle. You're my cousin. You're my nephew. You're my father. You're my mother.
Choose love.
And show pictures of the happy times when you were together, videos, sing songs to rebuild the warmth.
Yes.
And then talk about these other things and ask their opinion. And those respectful questions will get people to step back because they care about you. And they see that you're respected. Oh, and the other thing is that I recommend is, hey, if you understand this stuff, you can afford to say, persuade me. I'll join you.
Yeah.
And then if they say, watch these 50 videos, I say, pick one that was particularly important for you. Let's watch it together. We'll pause it and discuss it. Then it'll be my turn to share one, and we'll watch it together. So in other words, you're not being like this and talking down to them. You're like, hey, we care about each other. Let's go for what's real and what's true. Because neither of us want to believe wrong things or things that are going to be contrary to our own best interest.
It's great advice. I mean, look, it's the hardest thing to answer, and you answer it so well, because there are so many families that have been torn apart because of politics in the last 5 or 6 years. We have to take one more break, and then we're going to come back finally and talk about climate change and try and work out how to convince people who don't believe it's a thing that it's actually a thing. Dr. Steven Hassan. Back in a moment. Did you know that your temperature at night can have one of the greatest impacts on your sleep quality? If you wake up too hot or too cold, I highly recommend you check out Miracle Made's bed sheets. Inspired by NASA, Miracle Made uses silver-infused fabrics and makes temperature-regulating bedding, so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long. Using silver-infused fabrics originally inspired by NASA, Miracle Made sheets are thermoregulating and designed to keep you at the perfect temperature all night long, so you get a better sleep every night. These sheets are infused with silver that prevent up to 99.7% of bacterial growth, leaving them to stay cleaner and fresh 3 times longer than other sheets. No more gross odors. Miracle sheets are luxuriously comfortable, without the high price tag of other luxury brands, and feel as nice, if not nicer, than bed sheets used by some 5-star hotels. Stop sleeping on bacteria. Bacteria can clog your pores, causing breakouts and acne. Sleep clean with Miracle. Go to trymiracle.com/weekend to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo code WEEKEND at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/weekend and use the code WEEKEND to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. That's trymiracle.com/weekend to treat yourself. Thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode. We're back. It's the Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. This is Dr. Steven Hassan. We are trying to kind of get our heads around how we communicate with MAGA Republicans who've been lost to the cult of Trump. It's been the hottest last couple of weeks in history. We've been told for the last 60 years that carbon emissions are the cause of the planet heating, the planet warming, global dimming. There's so many subjects. You don't have to go far to read about it. The media have, done their best, but I still see them covering extreme weather events, and they don't mention climate change. And it should be in every single report. It should be the first thing they start with. Look what climate change has done today. But for some reason, they choose not to. Maybe they think it's polarizing. When did climate change become politicized to the extent that, I heard Ron DeSantis again say, "Oh, that's Democrat stuff." I tried to think, is it because they gave the job to John Kerry to kind of be the one to talk about it all those years ago? Or, when was it weaponized? Because, unlike politics itself, climate change will affect everybody, Democrats and Republicans alike. Right, we're all gonna burn, and no one seems to be making a case for the fact that the denial, the climate denial, is insane. It must be part of the cult mentality.
Yes, it is. But remember, the tobacco industry knew that smoking cigarettes caused cancer.
Yeah,
and they hired experts to say, nope, it's not smoking. Right. But they knew that it was, but they deliberately lied, just as the Sacklers did with OxyContin. It's not addictive. Yeah. Keeps selling it. And it's this greed and selfishness, and I blame Ayn Rand and that whole objectivism cult that says selfishness is good and altruism is evil. Or the social Darwinistic aspect of, well, I have more money, therefore I'm a superior person to you, versus I got lucky and my parents had wealth, like Donald Trump. And if my family didn't have money, I'd be like a grifter on the street corner.
Yeah.
But in any case, one needs to go back to each individual person. I mean, we can talk about messaging from the media, but my understanding is that people who are weather people who do try to say it's global climate crisis, they start getting threats against their personhood, right. And they retire because they want to protect their family.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of intimidation, coercion, and fear that's being used to silence the truth. So coming back to people who are experiencing these horrific, traumatic events.
It's 120 degrees in Arizona this week, right?
And we've had these horrendous floods in New England, particularly in Vermont recently here. So, but the question is approaching someone who says it's not man-made, fossil fuel driven stuff. Interesting to hear you say that. Can you explain to me why you believe that, please? And because I want to just cite a book called The Knowledge Illusion by two cognitive neuroscientists, but you can look it up what their names are. But what they did was scientific experiments that show that people walk around believing things, but they have no idea what the evidence is or why they believe it. And they use a thing like, how does a toilet flush? Like, what's the mechanism that actually makes the water go down? And they use it to explain that people just know they flip the lever and it goes away. But people depend on other people who are experts if they need details to explain the physics or to explain the mechanisms of it. And what's happened since the invention of the internet is people now have the illusion you can go on Google and know anything. So they almost, have this inflated sense of knowledge when in fact they really don't understand much at all.
The very basics.
Or the
but
very...
is this like Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yes.
Is this like a similar thing? Just explain Dunning-Kruger, because I find it fascinating.
I'm not at the moment going to coherently be able to explain it. Can you do it, Anthony?
Probably not coherently, but I
know
recognize
but I'm on a track in my brain just to,
all I was going to say is that it probably, because I'm very interested in American exceptionalism. I read books about that and the idea that America and Americans have this kind of greater sense of self, and as you described with the toilet system and not knowing how it works, what it is that gives people supreme confidence, and the confidence of their convictions, and to argue their case without knowing any of the detail or not having done any of the work. And isn't this part of the problem and also part of the success of America? Winning the space race and all of the great achievements of the United States. It's
science, and it's real medicine. And by the way, I looked up Dunning-Kruger. It's exactly the point I was making, that people overestimate their ability to say they know things when they don't. Yes. But what part of fourth generation warfare is attacking expertise and attacking science. Yeah. And what I want to say about the brilliance of science and why humanity can now live to 100 when we used to live to 20 or 30 is because we have this approach to learning, that we have a belief and then we do evidence-based testing to either support the belief or get rid of the belief. And we're willing to get rid of a belief if there's a better explanation for something. And that's how science progresses. So we learn more. When you have a belief system with certainty, that's black and white, us versus them, good versus evil, you think you know everything. You filter out anything that doesn't enter this little narrow gate. And what happens over time is you get smaller and smaller. You don't get any new information or new perspective.
The pandemic was a perfect example of this, wasn't it? When, the pandemic obviously affected the whole world, but, Republicans in America just made out that it was just done by Democrats because and then blaming China and a lab and all these conspiracy theories. But the thing that bothered me the most about that was people who have no clinical experience at all, who knew nothing, have never even had a conversation about a pandemic or about the way infectious diseases spread, suddenly all became experts and all claimed that, the vaccine's not been tested, and which was just utter garbage. It might have been fast-tracked, but that's because normally it takes forever to get these things done. So every scientist in the world put down their tools and started focusing on these vaccines. And that's why they came out so fast. And
the technology,
you and I are alive because of it.
The technology had been worked on for 30 years, but now they had a real life situation where millions of lives were on the line. So they took the risk to rush to human experimentation.
Yeah. And they did the right thing.
Absolutely. But the thing is coming back to reality here is that we're in this spaceship Earth together, this beautiful glowing globe, and we need to preserve it. And we need to approach people where they're at I just was listening to a story about how in Florida, insurers don't want to renew insurance for waterfront property, or
That's
they
right.
want to make it astronomical. Now people are going to be in a situation where they don't want to believe that global climate change, but they have to pay, or they have to try to get rid of their house and move inland.
Yes.
Right? So there's a point where reality enters, and it's at those places where family members, friends, and neighbors can gently say, yeah, I used to believe that there was no such thing as global climate change. When Al Gore did The Inconvenient Truth, I thought it was propaganda. But now there's a lot of evidence that this is a real effect, and it's getting worse. And we're going to spend more and more money. If we don't do the stuff now, it's going to be catastrophically expensive going down the line.
Biden's done actually this quite cleverly with infrastructure.
Yeah.
He's baked all the climate change systems that are required into the infrastructure bill. And he's now talking about climate change as jobs. And so he sees wind turbines and solar panels, all of everything that we need for renewables as jobs, as good paying jobs. So instead of talking about them as if they're from the Green New Deal or the Green Agenda or, the happy clappy stuff, he's talking about it as if it's jobs and, security for people.
But
and
where we have to be
work.
careful is a lot of the fossil fuel companies and countries created these environmental friendly businesses that are getting government funds, but their goal isn't to develop what they said they're developing. They want to stall things as long as possible so they can have as much, greedy cash as possible.
Yeah, it's the same as the tobacco industry that you describe. It's just like,
right. But coming back to, if you love your children and your grandchildren and you use them as a motivation, then you can't be complacent. No. Like if you think, well, I'm almost 70, I've got another 20 years, it'll be the next generation's problem. You can do that, but I have a 20-year-old son. I want to think about his best interest and my cousins and grandchildren of my sisters, etc. So for me, I don't think there's an option to be casual about this.
They can't even show compassion for children that get executed in school shootings. I mean, this is the thing that I struggled to overcome. It's like if you've got MAGA Republicans, both lawmakers and supporters, who would rather protect their guns than protect their children, how are you ever going to convince them on climate change?
So again, it's about a business or a set of entities with a vested interest, and they're using the most sophisticated psychological mechanisms, including media, including social media, to divert people's attention or misdirect legislation or buy off politicians and corrupt them. And I just really think greed is so harmful and ultimately self-destructive because, again, we're on one planet. Think about it. If we're all on one rowboat, if we thought of the world as everybody on one rowboat and it's leaking, like, what are the options here? Let's put it off for another decade and deal with it.
We have nowhere else to live.
Leaking.
This is the point.
We're going
Maybe this
down.
is why Elon Musk is desperate to get us or get himself to Mars and wants to colonize another planet because
I'd love to counsel Elon Musk. Actually.
Yeah, I bet you would.
He's on the spectrum, and I think he would love to look at my influence continuum, and I could have a very interesting conversation with him. Because I do think that he has adopted some very destructive beliefs, that
including the Putin support, which he's putting out in tweets all the time.
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
The bottom line is that I want to put forth a message of hope and that we need each other. All these individuals say selfishness is good, selfish gene. It's like, no, humans have evolved because of cooperation, because we have fundamental trust in each other.
And compassion.
If you're hungry and I give you some bread, if I get hungry, you're going to want to reciprocate with me because you remember that I gave you the bread when you were hungry. And
it goes back to simple Christianity at the end of the day,
or
right?
Judaism. I mean, Hillel said, "Don't do to others what you don't want done to you." I just want to mention Arno Michaelis was a neo-Nazi white power devotee. He had a music band and recruited people. And what got him out of it was his Jewish employer saw he was hungry one day, and the guy took half of his sandwich and gave it to him. And when he went and he had money and he went to McDonald's and there was a black server who was smiling at him and was kind and nice to him. All these things were dissonant in his ideology. And then he had a kid and he's like, being hateful sucks. Like, I like hanging out with people that are fun and that care about me.
I think about that with Trump and Flynn and all of these characters. I think you guys must be so unhappy, just no joy, to have a clear conscience and to be able to just enjoy time with your friends and family without worrying about all those lies that you've told or all that propaganda that you've spewed. It's a lot. It's
miserable to be a malignant narcissist because honestly, you don't trust anybody.
Right.
And you have this hole in your self-esteem that you constantly are trying to fill from other people outside of you who you don't trust. And it's a miserable existence, actually.
We have to finish, but I always adore these conversations. There's so much to learn, and I'm so grateful to you for your activism as well as your academia. It's very, very helpful and important.
Thanks so much. I'll just say, come to Freedom of Mind and check out my website, my blogs. I did a great, very interesting interview with former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman recently. Yeah. And we talked about him growing up in the Mormons and leaving it and everybody shunning him. It was fascinating. There's a lot of interesting content, and educate yourself, because really we need to be prepared to understand just how much more information warfare is coming down the pike between now and the presidential election with deep fakes and more AI stuff. So let's band together and uplift each other with values.
All right. Dr. Steven Hassan, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. See you.
On The Weekend Show.
Bye.
I'm Anthony Davis. Subscribe to MAGA Uncovered, my new show with Ron Filipkowski on Wednesdays. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism on patreon.com/5Minute News. The 5 Minute News Daily podcast drops every morning. You can hear me tell you what's going on around the world while you make a coffee. And join me next week with a brand new special guest and 3 more factual news stories to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.